Alright, here we go. This is my third attempt at a review of the first episode of The Last of Us on HBO. My first two uploads got copyright blocked. Not too sure why, maybe I had too much of the show content playing. So this time I'm just going to have images, not any video. Maybe that's why I didn't have any music playing, so I'm still not sure, but here's attempt number 3. So yes. Two days after the show came out on Sunday, I've watched it twice since. Just because, and yeah, it's amazing. It's what I knew it would be. After a year or two of following this show, more than I've ever followed any other show or film or anything. A, because it's a video game adaptation that I knew was going to be amazing and was going to change the face of video game adaptations, which I know it will. And B, because it was shot in Calgary where I live, so I was able to actually visit some of the sets and see some cool stuff. So seeing some of the stuff that I saw in real life on camera was pretty cool. But onto the show itself. Yes, it was great. And the acting across the board was great. I really was. And the acting, of course, was great. I mean, Pedro, I knew he would deliver. I just knew. I mean, he's been good at everything I've seen. So you can't really complain about him as an actor. When all else fails, put Pedro in your movie or your show and it'll be great. Nico Parker was great, who was actually the daughter of Thandie Newton, which I didn't know, but now that I look at her, it's pretty obvious. And as you can see, she's wearing the same shirt that Sarah from the game. Of course, anyone who knows the game knows that Sarah in the game was white, but they decided to have Joel as, I guess, Spanish or Mexican, and then she's a mixed race daughter, but the mother, they never explain in the game. Maybe in the show they do later, they explain why the mom's not around, but they never really did. But Nico Parker was great, and I liked how they extended her opening and made the earlier part of the show about her a lot. So a lot of people that maybe don't know the game would have their rug pulled out from under them after the first act is over, and spoiler alert, Sarah dies. But she was great. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that she'll come back in a flashback. I'm sure they'll have a flashback episode with Joel's life, with Sarah, maybe even the mom, who is still a mystery. So no complaints about her. Gabriel Luna was also great as Tommy. The only thing I remember seeing Gabriel Luna in was the Terminator movies. But he was solid. I think he may be the biggest surprise in this show overall. Who knows? Because he didn't have that much to do in the first episode. But his take on Tommy was like exactly like the game, which is interesting because there's no need to make your voice sound just like the character from the game. But he went for it and he nailed it. Yeah, so some of the changes they made, all the changes they made sense to me. Extending Sarah's intro and showing how she goes to get the watch fixed instead of buying it like from the game, and then showing a little bit of the mayhem starting in the background, and then her giving him the watch, and then everything starts to happen after that. That was a great idea, just to help build more of the tension, because you knew something was about to happen, we just didn't know what or when. And the change of having the neighbor who begins infected being the old lady who was, who's this old lady who probably has like dementia or something because she doesn't move or do anything in the chair. But then the infection shows how it can actually change your physiology, and even if you're like a comatose, it'll make you come alive because it's literally taking over your body. And you're just kind of like the host, and it's now you. So using the older lady and showing how it changed you was probably my favorite change from the game. It really shows how extreme this fungus is and how it can turn anyone into a psychotic killer, basically. The part in the diner I also dug just because it was very quick, but like showing how the fungus like kind of is controlling this person's body to the point where it's throwing itself against things with zero care for any self harm. It just wants to come at another person and and make that become the new host. Its only goal is to spread. That's it. So showing that viciousness through this random person who literally throwing themselves into things just to get them, it was really pretty hardcore, and I liked that. It was great. And yes, of course, the awful moment here that we all know was going to come, and this is kind of thrown back a little later on. This is kind of a foreshadowing near the end of the show as well. I was also just curious to see how Pedro was going to play this part because I knew it was coming, and I knew it's a devastating moment for any parent. So how was he going to play that? And it was pretty emotional. Like even when I knew it was coming, it was still emotional. Again, that's just because Pedro's the man. And then they cut to 20 years later, and everything is just a disaster. The entire, I guess they're in Boston. Yeah, this is in Boston, and everything's just been destroyed. And seeing some of this, like I saw some of this in real life when it was just a set, so it's kind of amazing to see how much they built on the back of it with all of this that's not really there. I mean, from the ambulance on into these cars, all that back there is just digital or whatever. So maybe they use miniatures too. I don't know, but I don't think anyone uses miniatures that much anymore. But again, the effects are what you expect. HBO always brings the heat. They never spare any expenses with the effects, and this is one of the most expensive shows ever made, and it's gonna be obvious. And another moment they added that I liked though was with this child, boy or girl, I think it's a boy, that shows up from wherever, and they test him with the little thing, and it shows that the kid is positive with the disease. So they basically just lie and say, hey, everything's going to be okay, we're going to give you toys and ice cream, and cut to the kid being dead. And this was a great character moment for Joel. Showing him 20 years later and how he's completely unaffected by taking the body of a child and carrying it the exact same way he carried Sarah and throwing it in the fire. I think Tess was another change that they made. They made her a lot more hardcore than in the game. In the game, she was just kind of like leading them for a bit, and then she's gone because, spoiler alert, she dies. So probably in the show she's gonna die. But in this version of the show, she's way more of a badass, and they go deeper into the relationship that her and Joel have. Because in the game it was hinted at, but in here they just show her getting into bed with him, and they're just kind of lying together. So there's a love there between them, which is good. And she was just a lot more of a, I don't know, like I said, she was more hardcore than in the show and in the game. And she also was kind of almost like some moments later that happened where she's almost like Joel's controller, where she lets him off the leash every now and then, like saying, hey, go beat up this guy because he deserves it. And he's like, okay. And of course, the big question for me overall, for almost the entirety of the show, was how was Bellaramsey going to play Ellie? And I think she pretty much nailed it. Knowing that she's in British or English or whatever, I'm always looking for things, like seeing if maybe she didn't hide the accent too well with this word or that word. But you couldn't hear any hint of her accent whatsoever. So hats off to her and how they introduced her. They gave her some more development, and they also added the thing that Marlene took Ellie found Ellie somehow, which they never got into yet, and put her into the Fedra's camp. So that's something that's not from the game at all. They totally added that. And I'm not too sure where that's going to go yet, but there's a history between them. I'm thinking that maybe Marlene is Riley's mom or something, because Riley is a girl from the DLC, and that's probably going to be in the next episode or two about her backstory and how she got bit. So I think Marlene has more to do in the story of her backstory than it just her being some lady that finds Ellie, finds out that she's immune, and says, "Hey Joel, take this girl and bring her here." So they did as another good change that helps develop the story and the characters and make their backstory deeper. Another moment that they changed, or they kind of grew on, because this in the game they kind of meet similarly-ish in a way, but I don't know. In this, it always felt a little bit too forced. Like, hey, all of a sudden here's this girl, and you're like, oh hey Joel, you can take her. But they still did that because they just kind of ran into each other because he had no idea that she was there, and they don't explain how they know each other. They don't have maybe he used to be a Firefly and left, because Marlene is the leader of the Fireflies. Maybe that's a thing that's even in the game that I'm not too sure of, but they meet up and she's like, hey, we were going to take her, but now why don't you just take her? So they still kind of just made it a little bit too like, okay, she literally says the line, you know what, now I think you're going to take her. And Joel's like, the hell I am. But then, yeah, she's like, hey, I'll give you the truck, I'll give you all that. But I mean, the one kind of part of that was the whole point of him wanting the battery for the truck was to go find Tommy, because he hasn't heard from Tommy in a while and he doesn't know if he's okay. But he still has to go take this girl, bring her to wherever he has to go. Who knows how long that's going to take. Then come back, and by that time Marlene probably be dead because she's been shot. But that was a little bit of a part of the show that I thought was a little bit weak. Just because of like, hey, now that we just ran into each other, why don't you take this girl and completely go off on this different path? And then there's this moment here where it was almost exactly like the game, where they're at Joel's place and he's just lying down, and Ellie's like, what are you doing? Your watch is broken. She's also learning about the codes that they use on the ham radio for like using different eras of songs as codes, which is a smart idea. They're not talking to each other, they're just playing music, which is why they play a Depeche Mode song at the end of the show. And yeah, this is another great little moment, character moment between the two. They like just met each other. She's already getting on his nerves, but she's already getting frustrated with like having to just sit around. Like, what am I gonna do? What are you doing? Like, what am I gonna do? He's like, oh, you'll figure it out. Here she is smiling because she figured out, she cracked the code. And then here we are near the end of the show, where Joel has kind of a flashback moment with this guy that he dealt with earlier. And he's like, what are you doing? Don't leave. You can't leave the area that's immediate hanging. And then Joel just kind of snaps and jumps on the guy after having kind of like a PSDD moment. PSDD moment. There he is, making that face. Yeah, so Joel just jumps on the guy and goes crazy. But this moment here between Joel and Ellie is an important moment, because she's looking at him kind of like, damn, this guy is kind of crazy, but I like it. You know, if I'm going to have someone taking me somewhere, I'm glad it's this dude. But it's also the same moment where Tess finds out that she's positive, but she's like, I'm immune. So I feel like that moment could have been maybe developed, because she's like, hey, I'm immune. Oh, okay, you're immune. Let's go. But who knows? They'll probably touch on that more in the next episode, because this is the end of the show. And of course, I love how they ended on showing the clicker from afar right there. That was a nice little addition. And this little, toppled over building is almost exactly from the game. But if I did have to go to one part of the show that I thought didn't work for me personally, even though I get why they did it, was the cold opening. I just thought that it felt so detached from the rest of the show to open on some random talk show from 1968 with some random hosts and some random people that we don't know and we'll probably never see again, talking about fungus. And this guy here is a guy that talks about what scares me the most is fungus and what it can do to you. And he literally just basically explains the cordyceps virus and how it spreads. And I just felt that it was very detached from the show. But listening to the podcast after, I get why Craig Mazin decided, because even Neil Druckmann wasn't too sure of it himself. He's like, I don't know if that works. But then once the show was edited together and they put that back in, he was like, okay, that makes more sense, because it does add kind of an impending doom to like the rest of the show leading up to, you know, what happens. But I just thought that it felt a little disconnected from the rest of the show to just randomly show this thing from 1968 and cut to 2003. I thought maybe they could have done it in a different way. They could have even just like showed that it was already spreading in a different part of the world, but they didn't know yet because they're in the States or whatever, because it originates somewhere in Southeast Asia, according to what they're going to do with the show. But that was the only little weak thing of all around really solid and amazing first episode, and I hope that this version of my review doesn't get taken down again, because this will be my third time trying to do this. But it was a spectacular show, and the next 8 episodes, I can't wait. The next 8 weeks I'm going to be watching the show and then listen to the podcast, so I'm going to be just having like the Last of Us overload for the next 2 months. It's going to be great. Stay tuned, subscribe, and let me know what you think of the show. Did you like it? Was there anything about it that you didn't like, or what was your favorite part? Just let me know. Subscribe below, comment below, and let me know. It's time to go.